Since 1939, the base at Saldana has provided a home for the instruction of signalers, seaward defense personnel, Air Force men, soldiers, swans and sailors alike. The names given to the base over the years have been many and varied, from Naval Gymnasium to SAS Dromedaris. In 1955, the unit was given its present name, Sas Saldana. Saldana itself was mistakenly named by a Portuguese navigator who thought he had discovered the bay in 1503, naming it Aqueda de Saldana, watering place of Saldana. Since the naming of the bay by that mistaken navigator some 485 years ago, Saldana has grown from merely a watering hole to a multi-million rand agricultural, fishing and ore export industry. The thousands of permanent force recruits and national servicemen that have passed through SAS Saldana have added to that history. And still today, recruits have that sense of pride by association with the history and traditions associated with SAS Saldana.
The reality of the call-up became all too clear when I, along with hundreds of others, mustered at Goodwood Showgrounds in order to catch our bus up to Saldana. All the mental preparations, all the ideas and fears that we'd had in our heads was now becoming a reality. Fortunately, for those leaving from Cape Town, we would be in Saldana in a matter of hours. Others were not so lucky. Those travelling from the Eastern Cape, Transvaal and Durban had a long bus journey through the cold Karoo wastes before they came to Saldana. When the bus turned into the camp at Saldana, a silence fell over those in the bus. As soon as the buses stopped, we were attacked by what seemed to be thousands of instructors shouting and screaming at us to get off and stand to attention. This was altogether confusing. It seemed almost more than the body could stand to rush off a bus, try and take in your new surroundings, being asked questions by instructors, being told what to do by instructors. Perhaps the most disconcerting thing was that we were required to use our voice at a decibel level which we perhaps had never used before. Instructors standing no more than 2 inches away from you would scream at you and you would have to scream back at them. What made life even more disconcerting was the fact that you had absolutely no idea of what rank people were. Your usual methods of addressing people were thrown out of the window. One could not look at an instructor. One had to look up into the heavens. One could not try and put your case to him in a quiet, logical manner. One merely had to answer, yes, able seaman, or no, able seaman. Having been provided with the 2 overalls, we were then ushered into a larger classroom and issued with our bedding. Instructors, overcome by a strange sense of kindness at that stage, warned us that we must take a good mattress. The only problem was we weren't sure what a good mattress was. People just took whatever was on top because any delay normally resulted in an AB screaming in your ear. Having obtained the mattress, we then had to sign for 2 blankets, which looked totally inadequate to combat the cold of Saldana, as well as sheets. Those friends and brothers of ours who had already attended one of the branches of the SADF had warned us about the long march with the heavily laden trommel. Fear seemed to grip the minds of the trainees, and once healthy backs were suddenly found to be too weak to carry the burden. Trommels were being dropped, bedding went all over the place. Once all the bedding and trommels had been neatly stacked away, we were then further herded into a small area where we had to feed mind-numbing information into computers. We lined up outside windows, out of which peered various Saldana personnel who looked as if they'd be far happier doing something, if not anything else, than taking down our personal details, trying to encourage trainees to guess what their height was, try and remember the color of their hair, and so on. The most daunting moment was when you were finally confronted with the command, "Give me your force number." And that force number, which you had so dutifully committed to memory over the last 2 weeks, just was not anywhere to be found. Having been sorted out into provisional mess decks, the great moment arrived when we were to go for our medicals. Prior to this time, we had lived a life of reasonable physical luxury, in that we had not been certified one way or another. The instructors therefore did not have license to foist upon us any aggressive physical punishment for our many early misdemeanors. Many of the men under training, of course, were quite confident that they were perfect physical specimens and that the medics would find nothing wrong with them, and that they therefore would be classified G1, K1, N1. In other words, perfect physical specimens placed at the mercy of the instructors for any kind of physical undertaking. The initial medical checks simply checked weight, height, color blindness, and the ability of your eyes to see more than 20 feet. After that, the real business began, and one could rest momentarily on a bed whilst your blood pressure was taken. After blood pressure, one then went and spoke specifically to a doctor of the medical corps, and you could pour out your tale of woe regarding the injured knee, sore back, pulled tendons, and flat feet. The doctors were generally sympathetic, and if they had any doubts, you were sent into yet a further stream in order that the orthopedic surgeon could inspect you later. If the doctors were of the opinion that there was nothing drastically wrong with you, you were ushered towards the sister, who was armed with syringes. On completion of all these medical examinations, the healthy trainee then put on his overall, stepped outside, and had the letters G1, K1, N1 chalked on his back. No sooner had the chalk left the material of the overall than the trainee was chased and made to fly all over the training base. Those whose physical attributes were questionable were then either designated as G3s, which meant that they did not have to undergo the full physical training of basics, or if their condition was perhaps worse, they were sent to go and see the orthopedic surgeon.
And as we walked out the door, we went straight to the barber, and there the hair was cut. And that was the worst, because some guys had long hair and they just sat there and there's a mirror in front of you and you just watch your hair getting cut away. And your hair was, it was the last, like, remnants of your civvy life. You know, your civvy clothes, you weren't wearing them anymore, and your hair was the last thing. And it was just all cut and was so short. And that whole day, guys were just feeling their hair all the time because it just wasn't there anymore.
The day of kit issues was very important in the trainee's life. For weeks he'd been wandering around looking similar to a convict with shorn hair and overalls. These overalls were not fetching and did nothing for the trainee's figure. But on kit issue day, he was taken down to slops and issued with the real thing. AWD's, action working dress. His smart black step-out suit and his whites. He would receive his beret, he would receive his cap. At last he would look like a sailor and proud to be in the Navy. The only problem is that slops, where one obtained all these garments, is about 4 kilometers from the base. A pleasant bus trip through the countryside took one to slops, but it was with some concern that the trainees noticed that the bus drove off and did not seem to have any intention of waiting for them. At the end of the queue, one emerged with an enormous brown bag weighing almost 40 kilograms. Still filled with a sense of pride, the trainee had no difficulty in hoisting this balsac onto his shoulder and staggering out to the mustering point outside. Imagine the consternation of the trainee when he was told that he would have to personally take this bag the 4 kilometers back to base. Not only that, but that it would be unacceptable if he took his bag over his shoulder. Instead, we were told that we had to take the bag in what is known as the baba dra position. In other words, one has to clutch the balsac to your chest in front of you. If this were not bad enough, one was then required to actually run some of the way back. Some of the way, of course, turned out to be most of the way. Instructors found all sorts of unusual ways to brighten up the journey home. In particular, diving into the bushes with your balsac still clutched to your chest proved to be a favorite amongst the instructors. What made the final leg of the Baba Dra back to the base really bad was the fact that you had the base in sight all the time, but that the road leading back to the base just went uphill all the way. The relief on putting that balsac down when you got to your mess deck was immense.
The first aim of basic training is to introduce the trainee to the military environment. Deur hom bekend te stel in die militêre omgewing, verseker ons daardeur dat die kwekeling homself altyd korrek kan handhaaf en homself in korrekte optrede kan verseker. The second aim is to instill discipline in accordance with the laid-down naval standards. Ons verseker hierdeur dat ons matrose dan, of hy nou op see of op land dien, altyd korrek kan optree. The third aim is to teach the trainee certain skills and practices to prepare him for specialist training at a later stage. Die optrede, vaardighede en gewoontes sal hom altyd by hom bly waar hy nou van hier af gaan om verdere kursusse te doen wat benodig sal word op see en ook op landbasisse. Fourthly, we ensure that a fitness standard of 60% is reached. Ons aanvaar dat gesonde liggaam huisves 'n gesonde gees en dit is vir ons net so belangrik in die vloot om fiks te wees as van ander weermagsdele verwag kan word.
Die eerste oggend toe stap ons uit met ons mooi blou uniforms. Die ouens voel ewe trots na hulle nou vir induksiefase net overall gedra het. Hulle nou slag netjies 'n blou klere aan. En ons word nou redelik gedrill. Ons het dan nou tydens induksiefase so 'n bietjie drillwerk tussen bevaar as iemand koetser en bevaar as iemand sonders gekry en skerp ons nou redelik op. Bevaar as iemand koetser vat ons daai oggend. En die ouens het nogal eens sleg gedrill vir die so vroeg in die tydens basisie. En ons PD officer was Gonzales stap daar rond. Nou, hy is die mean beer daar rond. Hy kyk dat almal se arms pragtig styf die lyf ingedruk is. Fingers bent at the first and second knuckle. En hy voel ons moet baie trots wees op Walter's divisie. As after all die beste divisie. Die wheelies het daar gesit op die kant. Die wheelies is al die ouens wat nou nie geskik is vir enige drillwerkie. Hulle moet hulle chitties gehaal by die dokter. So 'n papiertjie wat sê of hy nou afgeboek is vir hoe lank en waarvoor en so. Nou, hulle sit een kant en die ouens moet nou maar sit te kyk aan die son terwyl ons drill. Hulle mag nou nie op 'n ander plek sit nie. Hy be koetser het na stil klein mannetjie gelyk. Hy ons is maar redelik ligtig vir enige iets wat 'n rang gehad het op die skouer of op die langs die skouers. So in die eerste paar dae het die manne nie vreeslik probeer kanse vat nie. In die begin het hulle ons vreeslik rondgejaag.
A lot of the guys marched out of step in the beginning, very uncoordinated, mostly because they'd done cadets at school, and which is marching army style, where you stamp your feet down when you march, and you lift your feet 90 degrees to the deck. In the Navy, it's totally different. You just slide your foot to the side, and whatever movement you do, your feet are kept low to the ground. There were another few guys who just couldn't march at all, and took hours of training to get them to get into step. In the beginning, we ran quite a lot if we'd made mistakes. Everything had to be sharp. With our right dress, our arms had to be 90 degrees to the deck, and we had to be looking straight to the right of us. Everything had to be perfect. Our hands had to be bent at the first and second knuckle, which took a lot of getting used to. Our elbows had to be tucked into our sides. But now, right at the end, it's so much easier. It's easy to do it. We've got used to it. Leading Seaman D. Barker trained us very well. I think he was a good trainer. He instructed us right from the beginning with drill work.
Meal times for us is one of the better times of the day. We all look forward to it because unfortunately they don't feed you too much food here. So you get very hungry during the day, and as soon as they pipe for lunch or breakfast or something, you fly, and you've got to line up in these long lines. The guys who get there first stand right at the front of the door, and then the lines go right back for about 20 meters or 30 meters or so, and then the chef will come out and he'll choose about 5 or 6 guys from each side, because you've got to form 2 lines, and then he chooses about 5 or 6 guys from each side to go and dish up. And everybody hates dishing up because you've got to stand dishing up for about 450 people, and near the end, when everyone is finished, there's hardly any food left, because the galley is only equipped to make food for about 60 people, and it's got to make for 450 people, so there's often problems and things. But once you get inside, you get your varkpan, which is a little silver like plate, and you've got to take your own knife and fork and spoon and your cup. It's called a pickstel. You take that with, and then you go past the buckies, whatever, and get your food dished up. And there's about 5 rows of tables aligned with chairs, and you have to go and fill the gaps. You can't sit where you want, otherwise you get into trouble. And normally there's an officer or leading seaman or someone on duty, and they'll come around and ask you if your food's all right. And although you're not allowed to talk to your friends, you still do talk very quietly, and they don't seem to mind. And for breakfast, normally you get scrambled eggs and bacon and oats or cornflakes and some coffee. And lunch is normally a bit better. It's normally meat or mutton, beef with vegetables and potatoes sometimes. Sometimes they give you milk and sometimes they give you guava juice or orange juice. And supper times is normally the better one. They give you normally roasts, roast beef, roast chicken, whatever. Sometimes we get fish, which is very nice. I look forward to the fish. Most people don't seem to enjoy it, but it's very nice. And we get coffee. Mostly in the evenings we get coffee or milk. The food's actually very nice, but there's not enough of it.
This is one of our earliest inspections done by able seaman A.B. Hum. As you can see from the video, nothing was really correct. All the beds were a little bit lousy. And our inspection that morning, nothing was right for A.B. Hum. Everything was out of place. Nothing was as it should be. And as a result, we ended up with corrective training, which took the form of inspection at about 9 o'clock that night. In this corrective training, A.B. Hum went through all our cusses, checking everything, ironing, dirty clothing. If stuff wasn't done properly, all the pakkies had to be correct, socks folded correctly, and everybody's stuff had to be the same. As a result of lack of uniformity, a lot of the stuff got thrown. As you can see stuff getting flung around the dorm, stuff getting dropped on the floor, people's shirts getting thrown around, somebody else's shirt getting thrown over my head. This is the sort of thing that went on to bring us up to A.B. Hum's standards. He had very, very, very high standards. And as a result of keeping those high standards, he brought Beerman 3 right up. Very positive about A.B. Hum, as he enabled us to win the best dorm trophy, as well as winning the best instructor trophy later on in basics. He kept our spirits high, and he brought the dorm together as a whole quite a lot. At the end of it, we had our uniformity in the cusses and in the trommels was almost perfect, and we worked very hard for him. Not hard enough sometimes, and we paid quite dearly for it, but on the whole we enjoyed ourselves. Some of it's been quite good fun, the rest of it was quite difficult. But these corrective training sessions this was not the first and definitely not the last. And we ended up with this sort of thing fairly often, just to bring us up to A.B. Hum's standards. But I enjoyed basics, and I wouldn't have gone through basics with any other instructor.
Van der Belang is ons divisionele offisier en elke Vrydag het ons inspeksie by hom. Die eerste Vrydag het ons inspeksie gehad by hom en ons klaskaptein bring gewoonlik ons manne in die kamer op aandag. Wanneer die klaskaptein nou die manne in die kamer op aandag gebring het, dan kom die offisier in en as hy by jou kas kom, dan moet jy draai sodat jy na hom toe kyk. Dan sê hy vir jou, jy moet jou kas oopmaak. As die kas nou oop is, dan begin kyk jy na jou pakkies. Jou hemde, jou wit hemde wat jy kry, moet precies A4 grootte wees. En dan word jy uitgereik met jou PT klere. Nou, jou PT wesse en jou PT broek moet weer A5 grootte wees. Nou, dis die eerste ding wat hy na kyk. Hy kyk na jou hemde of dit A4 is, en soos ek nou gesê het van die pakkies, of dit die regte grootte is. Dan kyk jy na jou strykwerk, of jou strykwerk op standaard is. Nou, van die manne kry maar 'n bietjie swaar met die stryk en so, maar ons help mekaar om dit reg te kry. Dan, as jou hemd nie reg gestryk is nie, dan gooi jy hom net bo op die kas en hy sê vir jou, as hy volgende keer weer kom, dan moet dit reg wees. Nou, hierdie week dan het ons inspeksie by die bevare seemanne. Nou, die bevare seeman staan by en hy skryf alles op wat die divisionele offisier noem, wat verkeerd is. En dan kyk hy hierdie week daarna, laat dit reg gedoen word. Soos ek gesê het, na hy al die klere gekyk het, of het alles reg is, dan begin hy op jou toiletwaarde. Jou tandepasta moet deurgekyk word en binnekant die doppie moet dit baie skoon wees. Hy is ook baie erg oor die seep wat moet reg wees. Die seep binnekant moet kurkdroog wees en dit mag nie hare en goed op nie. Hy is baie streng op, hy is baie netjies offisier En hy verstaan party probleme van ons en so. Van die dinge wat nie reg is nie, dan raak hy party keer kwaad, maar mense kan sien hy kan dit binne perke hou. Hy gaan nie buite perke met ons nie. Die volgende goed wat hy na kyk is weer na jou bed. Hy kyk hoe jou bed of hoe die sheet lining is. Ons noem dit maar sheet lining. En dan jou trommels wat vet reg voor jou bed is. As die sheet lining nie reg is nie, dan word jou bed gedop. Hy word dit omgekeer en dan moet jy dit oormaak. Die trommellining, kyk hy staan voor in die klas en kyk of die trommellining of al die trommels reg agter mekaar is. O ja, en dan kyk hy na die skoene in die kas. Hy kyk of die naadjie onder tussen die skoen, tussen die leer en die sool van die skoen gaan daar gewoonlik stof en as ons elke dag so op die paradegrond gewees het en is maar baie moeilik om die stof daar uit te kry. As jy die skoen die dag nie reg is nie, dan word hy die kas uitgehaal en word maar net op die grond neergegooi. En dit sal help dat die mens weer die volgende keer nie wil hê jou skoen gegooi word nie en dit word dan reg gedoen. Ek sal sê dit is baie harde werk om reg te maak vir so deels round, want alles moet perfek wees. En dan is dis nie die kamers wat vir mense wag nie, dan wag wat ons noem die heads, dit is die toilette, dan wag dit ook nog. Niemand worry wat daar aangaan nie, ons morse gaan te kere daar en dit moet alles skoon gemaak word. Dan moet van die manne gevat word en wat in die brase moet gaan, daar's baie pype wat moet gebrase word. Die wasbakke mag nie vuil wees nie, daar mag nie water in wees nie. Alles moet uitgedroog word. Die krane moet gebrase wees. Onder op die vloer mag niks water wees nie. Alles moet opgedroog wees en dit is baie harde werk. Dan kom die offisier in die toilet in, hy inspekteer alles, kyk of dit reg is. En die keer as dit nie reg is nie, dan kry jy mense bietjie opdraande.
Yes, you didn't do much, but I can see that you did your best in the army. And it's looking much better. And Alan, if you have buddies in sick bay, their cousins must be up to stand as well. Yes. Okay? Yes. Thank you, James. See you this afternoon.
Die eerste vasbyt wat ons gedurende ons basiese opleiding aangepak het, was die 4 km vasbyt wat elke divisie moes aflê. Nou gedurende hierdie vasbyt het ons nog alles in ons overalls gedoen, berei, tekkies en 'n waterbottel. Elke divisie moes deelneem hieraan. Vroeg die middag het almal aangetree op die sportparade by die sportgrond wat ondergeleë is van die basiskamp self. Daarna het ons weggespring. Almal het die keer geloop. Elke divisie se tyd was afsonderlik geneem met 5 minute periode van tydperk tussenin. Ons het dadelik van die sportgronde af verdwyn, af na die see toe, wat plus minus 2 km was, en dan het ons verdere 2 km op teerpad en grondpad weer terug na die sportvelde toe geloop. Die middag was warm gewees, 'n ligte noordweste windjie het gewaai, blomme was vars gewees, volkleurig, baie mooi. Die roete was interessant, sal ek sê. Dit het jou gedagtes heeltemal laat afsny van moeg word of ingee, alhoewel dit ons eerste keer was, en glo dit of nie, al het ons gestap, was daar baie mense wat nog redelik onfiks was. Ons eerste vasbyt, sal ek sê, het die meeste geniet. Daar was weer eens 'n kans gewees om jou vriende van nader te leer ken gedurende die verstap. Wel, vir ons was dit baie ver, die 4 km. Ek sal nie sê baie mense het gekla nie, maar baie het gou die bene bietjie aanhoudend gevryf, die voete gemarseer, maar dit was lekker gewees. die einde van die dag was daar 'n Edwards divisie wat oor geheel en al die beker gewen het van die vasbyt, sowel as die beker van die Esprit de Corps.
Towards the end of our third week in basics, Dalglish, Bierman and Johnson were taken by the PTIs on a fantastic run, the base at Saldana. We mustered on the sports fields and were then told that we were going on a short jog. We weren't given any directions, but just told to follow the PTIs. We set off up towards the back of the base and headed towards the harbour and proceeded round the lighthouse before descending on a narrow twisting path which hugged close to the shoreline down to a long beach. The day was a splendid one, perfectly blue with a cool spring sun on our backs. Spring had definitely come to the west coast and the countryside was littered with white, yellow and purple daisies. The run proceeded quite comfortably following the coastline past the first beach. It was only on descending onto the second beach that the real trouble began. The sand there was extremely soft and many a trainee discovered how unfit his calf muscles were. At the end of the second beach we ran up onto a road which took us most of the way back to the base. Having turned off the road, the final leg of our run was on a small, very sandy, soft sand track, which, however, did cut through some very beautiful countryside as well. The run was approximately 8 kilometers long and was enjoyed by almost everyone who participated in it.
I'm a trainee in Johnson 3. Abel Seaman from the Mava was the instructor. He used to come every morning. We used to have inspection. Our first few inspections was quite hectic. Like no one knew what to do or what was going on. That we only knew the basic things, what to do. Like, you should make a pucky and to where to go and your cuss and that. Well, that morning when he came in for inspection, for our first inspection, he came in and obviously he's going to find things wrong with it. And the people had woken up quite early in the morning just to try and get everything ready for inspection. At first, like you'd come in, everyone would come to attention, and the class leader would report the class ready for inspection. You'd go into a cuss and you'd look at the pakkies, which is our shirts, which should be folded into A4 size. He would take a piece of paper and just measure it, and if the one was a bit bigger than the other or not A4, he would just throw it on the ground or at the deck. Everything in the cuts had to be the same. Our socks and everything had to be all lined up with the guy next to him. And the dust, we never knew, we weren't like very aware of where the dust was, where to look for dust. Sometimes when you still come in and if used to call snakes or moles in your bed, like you'd either say, you know, like, I'll give you 3 counts and you're in your bed, and then 3 counts you're out again, and 3 counts you're back in your bed, and carry on. And sometimes you'd just say, you know, 3 counts and you're in your bed and you shoot those moles or those snakes, you know, just kill them. Everyone just laughs and that. Abel Seaman, at first no one really knew what he was like. They didn't really like him because of what he used to do in inspection. Like and just rips everything up, you know, all their hard work done, you know, for nothing. But then eventually we grew to know him better, and we found out he is actually human, and everyone had a better relationship with him.
Hier op Saldana behalve ons praktische werk, zoals het drillwerk en zo, lopen ze ook klassen. En dus heel dag 40 minuten of een uur in de klas, hangen af hoe lang die vak is. Dan doen we ons theoretische werk. Ons doen we verschillende vakken, zoals bijvoorbeeld bootwerk, militaire wet, geschiedkunst. Dat is maar net een paar van wat baie interessant is. Gewoonlijk biedt die instructeurs het vir ons aan. Maar van die vakke die divisionele offisier vir ons aangebied, dit is Van der Venter, ons divisionele offisier. Dan is al 2 klasse daar so, Etoos 1 en Etoos 2. Dan biedt hy vir ons die vak aan. Van der Venter is hy is baie intelligente persoon, baie vriendelik. Hy behandel ons baie goed. Hy het ons nooit eintlik baie moeilikheid gegee nie. Hy het ons van sy kant af het hy vir ons baie goeie dinge gedoen. En ek dink hy is seker een van die beste vaanders in die kamp, volgens my.
That we do, all the drilling we do during our basic training, which leads up to our final finale, passing our parade. Everything we do on the parade ground revolves around the passing our parade. All the maneuvers, the left and right turns, the slow march, the left and right forms, all our maneuvers. It's also, from an instructor point of view, a place where they can yach us around. Whenever we do something we're not supposed to, they get this attitude, well, they can't wait for the parade ground, because the first mistake we make on the parade, they make us run. Sometimes not even a lot of parade work gets done. It's more running than anything else. It becomes like a PT session. Well, my first impression of Abel Seaman to run was when we wanted to leave the class straight away, and that impression hasn't changed. His sort of outlook doesn't agree with what most of us think, most of us in the class. He's a very strict instructor that I think likes to show who's boss and keep us in our place, and sort of puts the whole class out. He can be a nice guy. He's got potential to be a very nice guy. Yeah, well, if we as a class work for him, then he works for us.
Parade ground for most people, I would say, in this camp is more like a nightmare than anything else. Say like we learn a new move one day, we just do that move around and around the parade ground until every single person's got it right. And wearing a jersey, a long sleeve shirt and blue pants in 25 degrees, it gets quite harsh. And after a while, our leading seaman Akel, gets quite irritated with the guys who can't do it. And then you start running around the cannons on the parade ground until you're so tired you don't want to drill anymore. Basically, the parade ground isn't much fun. A lot of the moves that we learn, we're not going to use, even in the battalion parade, on the passing out parade. All they do is quick march, left turn, and we have to do slow march and every single move, which you don't use very often. Our leading seaman Akel, my first impression of him was he looked rather smooth, and I could see it didn't look like it was going to be much fun. Even though in the end he turned out he's actually a very nice guy. He didn't actually do very much for our class as far as helping us. When he'd give us the odd bit of advice, but not very much. So we basically worked alone. But in the end, our class came right and we worked together very well.
Basic training in the life of any young person is a very traumatic time. For many it's their first time away from home, away from all their home comforts. For many it's the first time away from mom, and it's a time having to cope with their own ironing and sewing and cleaning of shoes and boots and all that sort of thing. It's a time of discipline. It's a time when people can't just do what they want to do, but have to abide by the rules and regulations of the Navy. Now, some people tend to cope very well with these things, and some tend to fall apart. And as chaplains, we form part of the support system in the unit. For example, we work very closely with the doctors, we work with the social welfare people, we work with the psychologists. As chaplains, it's our concern to deal with the man both body, mind, and spirit. And we try to reach out and to hold on to these people, especially when they tend to fall apart under the pressures of basic training. There's a very thin line between the emotional and the spiritual. And quite often we'll find these young people coming into our offices and sitting down and simply crying and just wanting to let go after all the frustration of a heavy day, not being used to being shouted at by instructors and that sort of thing. Also, there's some concern about
tweede klas kompetisie wat ons gehad het hierdie keer bestaan uit 12 kilometer roetemars. Hierdie keer was die roete baie goed sorgvuldig uitgekies, omdat dit vir al die manne onder opleiding interessant was. Hierdie keer het ons reg deur by die kus tot op die koppies geloop agter die akademie. Natuurlik het baie manne dit moeilik gevind om die 12 kilometer te stap, alhoewel dit nie vervelig was nie. Dit was baie interessant. Dit kon jou 'n langer tydperk gegee het om te gesels, en dit was verbasend om te sien dat die feit van geselskap en besig bly die tydperk baie verkort het. As jy besig was om te praat of te gesels of miskien hier en daar 'n liedjie te sing, het dit gevoel of die tydperk soveel. Dit was die lekkerste gewees. Jy was rondom blomme gewees, jou neusgate was aanhoudend gevul met die ontsettende lekker reuk van blomme. Daarna, nadat ons die afstand gevul het om die koppies, het ons weer by die akademie, militêre akademie uitgekom en met die teerpad weer afgestap na die sportparade toe, waar die beste of die vinnigste divisie van die dag gekies is. Na afloop van die dag se vasbyt het ons ook 'n klein prysuitdelingkie gehad wat bestaan uit 'n paar bekers. Die beraadste seeman was seeman Sage gewees van Bierman 2. En daar was ook natuurlik 'n prys gewees vir die netjie se slaapsaal, en dit het Bierman 3 gevat. Ook die beste instrukteur. Hy was bevare seeman Bekus. Hy het die prys gekry vir die beste instrukteur van die week. Die beste divisionele bootsman as bootsman Vasconcelos. Die persone wat die vasbytbeker gevat het, dit was die hele divisie van Bierman se divisie, en ook die Esprit de Corps het Bierman ook gevat. Van die onvergeetlike avonture wat ons gedurende ons basies gehad het, was bonnelsport. Dit het op 'n Saterdagoggend plaasgevind, skuins na 8 tot voor 12 die oggend. Nou, gedurende die bonnelsport was daar verskeie aktiwiteite wat ons kon deelneem. Daar was natuurlik 'n medisynbal wat jy agter jou rug oor 'n lyn moes gooi. Baie mense daarmee gesukkel en slegs net 'n paar punte was vir verskillende divisies aangeteken. Ons het ook 'n krywa gehad wat 'n sandsak opgehad het en ook 'n motorband. Dit moes jy nou verby paaltjies stoot, om paaltjies, deur paaltjies en dan weer terug in sy oorspronklike posisie. Wat lagwekkend aan betref, was daar jy en jou maat wat net een been en sy een been moes vasbind met 'n kous en dan moes jy in 'n sekere tyd afstand af lê om die paaltjie hardloop en dan weer terugkom. Daarna was elke man gegeen om sy kans van vroumens gebruik te maak deur 'n netbalbal in 'n netbalsirkel te gooi en dan weer terug te hardloop na sy maat en dan spring hy weer weg daarmee. Baie samewerking is vinnig tussen die manne opgebou gedurende die tydperk. Wat hulle ook gehad het was een maat wat 'n sandsak op al twee sy skouers gehad het, 'n afstand afgelê het om 'n paaltjie sonder om hom te raak of te stamp, terug sy ander twee maats het hom gehelp om die sak op die volgende persoon se skouers te laai en dan so te hardloop en te hardloop in 'n sekere afstand te lê en net 'n sekere tyd wat ons toegelaat was voordat 'n fluitjie geblaas was. Gedurende die tydperk moet jy kyk hoeveel punte jy in 'n sekere tyd vir jou divisie kan aanteken voordat die tyd verstreke was. Ons het ook toe hierdie sport klaar was ons gegeen om net 'n asempie weer in ons liggame te kry en die borskaste vol lug te maak. Daarna het elke divisie aflos gehad. Jy moes gekyk het hoe vinnig en hoe gou en sorgvuldig elkeen dit kon uitvoer. Nou die divisie wat alles vinnig, gereed en gou agter mekaar kon kry en voltooi het, hy het natuurlik die aflos gewen. Om die aflos mee af te sluit, was die dag afgesluit met toutrek. Dit was 'n harde dag vir die manne. Die toutrek het sweet ingesoeg sowel as toejuiging gekos. Baie manne het uitgeval en baie manne het weer goed gevaar. Natuurlik was daar van die sterkste manne wat julle hier kan sien in die basis wat hulle krag kon uitmeet op 'n tou. Toutrek was tussen 2 divisies wat mettertyd uitgeval het totdat die beste divisie vir die dag gekies was vir die toutrek. En weer tergend, moeilik en absoluut uitputtend geweest. Baie van die manne het dit genotvol gevind en natuurlik was daar paar wat die vasbyt net nie meer kon hanteer nie. Nadat die Bonnelsportdag einde se kant toe gestaan het van 'n heerlike, volopwindige oggend, het ons natuurlik soos gewoonlik weer 'n klein prysuitdelingkie gehad. Die Bonnelsport wenners was De Ruiter gewees. Die toutrekprys was gewen deur De Ruiter. Die afloskompetisie was gewen deur Douglas en die algemene wenners van die dag was Walters gewees. Die Esprit de Corps beker het dien ook gevat vir die beste toejuigende divisie van die dag.
Well, at Saldana, PT normally starts about 10 minutes before we actually leave the mess deck because everyone's crowding around ironing boards and trying to iron out the PD puckies, which have had to be in for inspection, and now all the crease had to be out, and you have a special crease at the middle of your PT pants, and your shirt had to be perfectly ironed. There was extra press-ups when you got down there. When you got down on the PT fields, the key thing was working together and teamwork. The PTIs were very enthusiastic about team spirit and singing and making sure that the whole group came in together instead of people coming in drips and drabs. PT normally consisted of a lot of push-ups and sit-ups and jackknives and leg raises and anything that if you do more than 10 times becomes very, very tiring. One of the key things I remember about PT is it's always having to run around the far rugby poles by the count of 20 and be back again, which was always impossible, but somehow we seemed to make it after about 2 or 3 attempts. We always seemed to be scared of the PDIs because they always had this hold over us, threatening to always take us to the beach with sandbags. We did this on the first time we arrived at PT, and soon learned our lessons that the sandbag, although it starts off quite light, gets very tiring after half an hour of lugging it around and doing press-ups with it. Some of us even took the sandbags for a swim in the sea, and that wasn't too pleasant an experience.
An inspection by able seaman Straddon is usually an occasion. It starts with the lookout spotting his marine swagger in the near distance. To be caught unprepared by the AB is something which you only do once. His approach causes a phenomenal burst of last-minute work. Buttons are found unsecured, dust mysteriously appears in bulkheads, tops of peaks are licked clean, blankets are smoothed out for the umpteenth time. The class captain then utters the fateful Johnson 4 ready for inspection. As little accent as possible is given to the word ready, for the men under training soon learns that this is an unpredictable word. Pleasantries over, the AB adopts a predatory stance. Sensors primed to spot anything not neat, tidy or uniform. Those being inspected stand rigid, eyes focused on some spot 2.5 miles distant. Despite the Herculean efforts of the Johnson 4 gang, there is always something wrong. Bed lining is the worst. We went to advanced physics lectures in an attempt to devise a method whereby all 11 beds would have their bases and sheet folds exactly in line. Of course, there's always some clown who gets it wrong. SIF is a dreaded substance. It exists somewhere between the faintest dust and the worst dirt. Buckles must shine. Boots must mirror his face. Windows must be spotless, not a smear anywhere. But the AB tracks down the dirt, and a neglected bulkhead provides the AB's finger with a scoopful of SIF. To him, it was like ice cream on a hot day. Such pleasure over filth is difficult to understand. A general mistake isn't too bad to live with, but it gets pretty bad when he starts getting personal. You can't blame someone else for your deformed pucky. Like most of the other instructors, A.B. Stradom has very high standards. However, his approach was perhaps more mature in that he developed the class step by step until we reached his standard, which we then had to maintain. To slip back at any stage was to invite rebuke.
Sif on the skirting board. It's not dust, it's sif. And I hate it.
My first day on parade, we were all very nervous and we didn't know anything. We didn't know what was going on. And our instructor, able seaman for us, he was shouting commands at us, and we weren't new to these commands, and we didn't understand most of them. So obviously there were a lot of mistakes. And as soon as you made one mistake, you'd come around and shout in your ear, and you get so nervous you'd make even more mistakes. And everybody hated parade ground. It was one of the worst things that you could ever do during the day. And the only time we would really enjoy ourselves was at bedtime. And we used to just live for bedtime. At first, when we met Able Seaman from us, we thought we hate it. We didn't like him in the beginning. We thought he was too strict, but after a while, you get to realize that it's part of your duty, and it's not so bad after all when you get used to it. And Able Seaman from us, he became sort of a friend to us. We realized he did his duty during the day when it was time to work, but after hours, he'd come and sit and chat to us and make us feel more relaxed. And then parade ground didn't become too bad. We'd have our fun times. We'd march, we'd try and do our best, and we'd take our breaks, water breaks and so on, and smoke breaks, and it became better as the time grew on. And although it was still hard, many people still don't really enjoy parade ground because it involves a lot of work, but it's not as bad as it was in the very beginning.
Well, the inspections for Johnson 1 were sometimes mellow, and most times he just used to come in there and trash the whole place. And this particular inspection, well, we used to have inspections Monday to Thursday, and then on the Friday the divisional officer came around to inspect the dormitory. And well, most times things were the same as with the Able Seaman Vicht. He just used to throw the whole place upside down. Basically the inspection consisted of checking for dust in your cusses. Used to check the shaving foam to see if it was clean, if there was water inside, or if it was rusted. And as in the case with my particular inspection on that day, my shaving foam wasn't quite up to standard, so I got it poured all over my head. And used to check for dust on the floor. The floor had to be polished until you could virtually see your face in it. And if it wasn't up to standard, well, you could easily check by throwing a beret across the floor and picking it up. If there was dust in it, well, then obviously it wasn't up to standard. Checking the clothes, used to look for uniformity to see if the clothes were all neatly packed away and they were folded the correct size and all that. Inspections started usually about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we all used to stand by in the dormitory, and then when you walked in, we'll be standing there all neatly to attention. And then, well, depending on what he was checking for, some mornings he would check the floor to see if the floor was polished. The next morning he would check the dust on the windowsills or if the windows had been cleaned.
So they often varied, sometimes from, might even be 10 minutes to sometimes maybe even half an hour you'd spend in the dormitory.
Die divisie wat julle voor julle sien op die paradegronde is natuurlik die beste divisie wat Augustus in name gehad het. Natuurlik die ruiter divisie, want ek is 'n seeman van die ruiter divisie. Parade tydperk is 'n baie swaar pil om te sluk. Niemand sien daarna uit nie, want dit is ontsettende harde werk, konsentrasie, bewegings wat korrek en dadelik stiptelik moet uitgevoer word, soos wat julle kan sien wat Basie Maneraal daarso vir ons gegee het. Die derde vasbyt wat ons aangepak het ons hierdie keer ons overalls verruil vir blouses en boots. Die vasbyt het bestaan uit plus minus 10 km draffie of hardloop, wat ook 'n redelike mooi en interessante roete was. Dit was harde werk om saam te werk, saam te bly en saam te sing. Dit was 'n senuweetergende roete gewees, maar ook 'n roete waaruit jy baie kon leer en sien en ook meer vertroue kon kry in jouself. Die roete wat ons gevolg het was een van die mooiste roetes wat die vlootbasis hier in Saldana kan aanbied en wat natuurlik gevolg het in Malgaskop en Baviaanskop. Nou, tussen die twee koppe het ons deurgehardloop waar 'n kloof gevorm is. In die kloof het ons natuurlik deurgekom tot by die akademie en daarna weer terug op die strand wat so plus minus 2 tot 3 km was, waar ons agter die sportvelde verskyn het en dan weer terug. Soos gewoonlik het ons elke keer na die vasbyt of roetemars tussen divisies het ons prysuitdelingkie gehad.
Ons hoor met rang. Ons het toe die laaste wedstryd gespeel. Die ruiter het gewen en ons moes almal af voor gaan aantree, op aandag gestaan en die kommandeer het vorentoe gekom en sy woordjie gesê en soos gewoonlik het die beste span die beker ontvang, naamlik die ruiter. Ek as spankaptein het opgegaan vorentoe, die beker ontvang en die kommandeer het gesê ons het dit gedoen om die gees onder die troepe of die seemanne op te bou.
The West Coast tour was one of the most important or most enjoyable parts of our basics. It got us together as a division. It was a 60k walk from Cape St. Martin all the way back to base. The scenery was beautiful. See the rocks all around was really wonderful. Our backpacks we had to pack consisted of a sleeping bag, ground sheet, extra blankets, our pick style, which was on our fork and cup, and toiletries. We left for Cape St. Martin early Saturday morning. We all went in buses, and we got there at about 6:30 in the morning. We stood around and waited for a while till everyone got organized into the divisions, and then we all left with 2-minute intervals between the divisions at 7 o'clock in the morning. Tromp Division, who are the PF force at the moment, came with us on the tour, and the Germany walked with as well. Our XO, Commander Mostard, and the medics joined us on the walk. For the first 10 or 15 kilometers, it was most enjoyable. We all stood around, we all walked around, talked amongst each other. For the last 5Ks before lunch, we walked. Some of us were battling to keep up with the marker in front who had extremely long legs and went at a rather steady pace. But we all saw as much of the scenery as we could. The sea, the rocks, the beaches, all the birds. Most of it was a nature reserve. We got to lunch at about 11:30, which was about 20 k's from Cape St. Martin. We sat down, we had sandwiches, banana, and a boiled egg. We left about 20 minutes after that for the place where we would stay that night. After leaving for lunch, the walk became quite tiring. We walked along. The scenery got even better when we walked through the mountains and over through the little narrow pathways looking down on the sea. We saw a whale and a couple of seals. We got to Sandbai, which was where the camp, where they'd set our camp up for the night at about 3 o'clock. There were tents for the instructors to sleep in, a medic's van, and mobile galley, a canteen. When we got there, all we wanted to do was just sit down and relax for a while. There was quite a long queue for the blisters, and surprisingly enough, quite a long queue for the canteen. The rest of the people just didn't want to do anything, just sat down and rested. After going to for the blisters and canteen, we all slept for a while, and then woke up for supper where we had a braai. It was very enjoyable. The meat was very good. That night, straight after we'd eaten, we all went straight to bed. We were very tired. We woke up early for breakfast the next morning. Right after breakfast, we had church parade, where the Dominee took us for church parade every Sunday. Straight after church parade, we packed up and packed all our things away back into our haversacks, and we left. The captain joined us on the walk on the Sunday. He walked along with the XO, Commander Mustard. It was very cold and cloudy on the Sunday when we started walking, but just before we got to the base, it started to rain, which made it very miserable and cold, made us all cold. And as soon as we got home, we just all took a hot shower and went straight to bed.
Thank you very much.
Gedurende ons basies hierso by Sas Saldana, die 90 opname Augustus, was een van die lekkerste vakke ook seker gewees was bootwerk. Dit word eintlik bootwerk genoem omdat die seemanne meer geleer word oor hoe om 'n boot te hanteer of te seil. Goed, elke divisie, daar is 7 divisies en elke divisie kry 'n week lank kans om hulle bootwerk agter die rug te kry. Nou gedurende hierdie week is daar ontsettende baie opwinding. Jy kry, soos wat ek gesê het, kry elke divisie natuurlik 'n week kans, waaruit jou eerste 2 dae uit teorie uit bestaan en jou laaste 3 dae uit prakties uit. Nou gedurende jou eerste 2 dae waaruit teorie bestaan, word jy basies opgelei hoe om touknope te doen, met skepe te werk of klein bootjies waaruit meestal seilwerk uitgeleer. Jy word geleer uit hoeveel seile word gebruik op 'n skip en natuurlik waaruit hulle bestaan. Hierdie 2 dae was ontsettend belangrik geweest, sowel as interessant. Jy word plus minus 8 tipes knope geleer wat jy moet uitvoer op 'n tou, hoe om die tou te hanteer, hoe om hom te knoop natuurlik, wat baie interessant was. Ek het nog nooit in my lewe gedink ek weet hoe om 'n tou te knoop nie, en so waar as wragties ek kan vandag 8 knope op 'n tou uitvoer. Dis baie interessant om te weet. Natuurlik het ek ook nie geweet waaruit seile bestaan nie en waaruit word seile gemaak nie. Maar natuurlik as jy 'n seevaarder is, dan moet jy natuurlik sulke dinge ken. Wat ook baie lekker was en wat opwindend was tussen die seemanne, was die laaste 3 dae, van die Woensdag tot die Vrydag, wat ons geseil het. Nou, al hierdie seilwerk word uitgevoer en gedoen by die jetty, onder by die klein hawietjie wat Saldana hierso het. Daarso word jy met klein bootjies uitgelaat in die hawe self, waar nie rof seewater of so is nie. Dan gaan jy uit, jy roei die eerste dag, wel die Woensdag, die 3de dag het ons geroei, en die laaste 2 dae, met ons geluk natuurlik, het die wind ook opgekom. En dit was ontsettend lekker om te seil. Dit was natuurlik, ek dink die meeste van ons seemanne se eerste keer wat ons geseil het. En ek dink dit was seker een van die lekkerste tye of tydperk wat ons in basies gehad het. En die seemanne het daai atmosfeer geniet, omdat dit warm sonskyn daar was, stil waters, en dit was genotvol om net 'n bietjie uit die slaapsale, die paradegronde en die lawaai af weg te kom. En dit is wat die week baie spesiaal en genotvol gemaak het.
One of the more dangerous parts of sailing, the jibe, the boom comes across from one side, normally right out the one side, comes right across, so it's right out on the other side. And it comes across at quite a speed, so those people who aren't concentrating, got their heads up, can land up with quite a headache. I speak from experience. on starboard, and if I was coming up on starboard,
Okay, is wat die donderdag gewees, ons het begin reggemaak vir exo rounds, wat baie...
15. For the trainee, there is still an hour and a quarter of torture ahead of him. Usually the trainee finishes his training for the day at about 1750 hours. He is then marched back to his dormitory as a squad, and having been fallen out, he rushes into the mess deck and collapses on any surface available. After a quick supper, the trainees rush back to the dormitories in order to secure the mess deck for security rounds. It is whilst working together, or being put into a situation where one has to work together, that the differences between the individuals are highlighted. These differences can work either for the team or against the team, depending upon how the people in the mess decks use those differences to their advantage or otherwise. As one would expect, your average mess deck was made up of both English and Afrikaans-speaking peoples. The hometowns of these people were normally scattered all over the country. The old rivalries between persons from the various centres throughout the country were, of course, always evident. These, however, tended to be good-natured, and in fact, after a period of time, did more to unify the mess deck than to divide it. The old adage of a friend in need is a friend indeed usually applies, and it is this grouping of people together in strange circumstances that necessitated the binding together of the various people in the mess deck. One of the interesting factors which brought people together was smoking. You had the smokers and the non-smokers. The smokers were always without cigarettes, and as a result had to make approaches to other people and get to know them in order to make sure there was a steady supply of their favorite brand. The non-smokers, of course, bonded together because of their total dislike and distrust of anybody who smoked. It was these simple things in the early days of basic training that forged friendships that were to last through the training, no matter in what mess deck the various people finally landed up. It was also a common factor that in most mess decks there would be a very broad range of educational qualifications. Academic qualifications, however, never seem to stand in the way. These differences can work either for the team or against the team, depending upon how. Inspections follow a predetermined course. Usually, inspections are undertaken by the able seamen or leading seamen instructors on Mondays to Thursdays. On Fridays, the divisional officers then have their turn in inspecting the mess decks. All of this has a purpose, and that is the preparation for the two big inspections of our national service, the inspections of the EXO and the captain. The EXO rounds take place on the second Friday before the end of basics. The EXO at Saldana was Commander Mostert. He was assisted on his rounds by the Master, Ensign Ackerman, Warrant Officer Fourie, and Warrant Officer Bauer. The build-up to EXO rounds is nothing less than dramatic. It usually requires an all-night effort on behalf of the mess deck. Teamwork is essential. The mess deck has to operate in such a way that it achieves excellence not only in their own personal kit, but also in the preparation of the mess deck. It is all too easy to overlook the one to the depredation of the other stuff. The driving force behind the mess deck getting together, polishing, scrubbing, cleaning, is the fearsome reputation of Commander Mostert. Whether or not this reputation can be regarded as pure mythology, or whether it has its roots in fact, your national servicemen cannot guess upon. Indeed, it becomes clear that the instructors and divisional officers spread sufficiently hair-raising stories to concentrate your trainee's mind on providing a perfect mess deck. On the day, the bleary-eyed trainees stagger around doing last-minute details. There is always something that is not correct, and requires a major operation to get into order. The trainee is aware at all times that the commander has the reputation of throwing the heavy iron beds within a foot of the ceiling, if not through the ceiling, and that he can knock down the heavy kassa with one hand. These two items, therefore, receive great attention, and the trainee's uniform is ironed completely, perfectly. There's not a spot of dirt anywhere, and the beds are pulled, pinched, kicked, and stretched into a perfect oblong shape. The problem with a large group of people parading through the mess deck looking for trouble spots is that there are more eyes than usual to pick up those areas that normally provide problems to the trainee. Indeed, there is the feeling amongst the trainees that the group has more eyes than that of a fly. It is at moments when the commander is peering intently into your cuss that you remember all the camouflaging that you have done, the preening of shirt collars, the hiding of dust into recesses of your cuss corner, the crumbs from cakes baked by your loved ones which you have stuck underneath your civic clothing. Perhaps the greatest thing about the commander's rounds is the sense of relief once he has finished. A real holiday feeling sets in when an inspection is passed without too much of a mishap. Of course, this sense of relief is usually dashed by the instructors who feel that their high standards have not been maintained.
Every Friday at Sas Saldana we have a class competition. This is the last class competition, which took the form of a 6 or 6.5 kilometer fussbait. This is the one they call the overload. They call it the overload for a good reason. Each team gets 8 car tires plus 2 truck tires, and each 10 men in your particular section or your particular dorm get a bed to carry. And then, just to make things a little bit more fun, each bed carries 2 38 kg sandbags. In addition to the team load, each man carries a sandbag in his webbing or backpack, a water bottle, and his rifle. Now, this may sound like fun, but that rifle is 4.3 kg and gets heavier each footstep. These things get really, really heavy, and after a while, you end up carrying 2 or 3 when your buddies are carrying beds. The route we took with all this was from the sports field, up the embankment, along the road for quite a distance, and they took us right round the headland, following a single track path carrying all these beds and things, along the beach for about 1.5 k's, and this one is murder on the calves. After that, they took us up the road, past the military academy, up the hill. This is where we started to take strain. It was all the way up this hill. We got to push this huge load that we were to carry in all these sandbags. We eventually ended up carrying the sandbags on our shoulders because the guys with the beds were finding the steel frames biting into their shoulders up the hills. We did no sooner get to the top of the hill than they turned us round and sent us back down the same hill again. This hill is called Malchus Kop, and well, the name Mal implies something. Back down the hill, along the same section of beach with one small exception. This was Dune 7. Dune 7 is the PTI's favourite haunting ground. Any time they feel like relieving their frustrations, they bring us along here for a PT session, and we run up and down this dune. We had to carry our overload burden up and down Dune 7 twice before carrying on. We carried on up the hill leading towards the sports field and the end of this particular fussbait. I think everyone in our particular dorm was glad to see the end of this one. Well, we made it. Everyone alive, every bit of our kit intact. Amazingly. you've got, you stand there.
The ultimate aim of all the long suffered inspections is to pass the captain's rounds. Trainees are threatened with captain's rounds from their very first inspection. This is to be expected because, after all, the captain is the boss. To fail him is unthinkable. To put your instructors and your divisional officer in the eyes is madness, because you will have to pay for that on the cabbage patch. Generally, most mess decks have a great desire to impress the captain with the inspections. It's the last big inspection, and all effort is put into preparing the mess deck. Lessons learned from the exercise rounds are applied. Attention to detail becomes the motto for the mess decks. Polish is applied to the bases of the kassa and the trommels, even to the bottom of the bedstands. Drawing pins are brassoed, locks are brassoed. Boots are boned to perfection until they shine. The moments before the captain arrives, the DOs do impromptu rounds, making sure that the trainees who are dressed in their best, their black step-outs, and the nerves are evident all round. As in so many things, our perception of the captain and the method in which he's going to undertake his rounds are incorrect. The rounds are strict but very fair, and the captain normally has a genial word or two to say to the shaking trainee under inspection.
Hier is sopas aan die einde gekom van die basiese opleiding hier op Sas Saldana. En ek is seker jy sal met my saamstem dat daar heel wat in die afgelope weke gebeur het. Dinge het verander. Vloere het dikker geword.
Sit asseblief.
Op die plek, rus! Bette, af!
Ons lees vandag saam Psalm 119, die eerste 16 verse.
Battalion will advance in review order. By the center, quick march. Battalion, General salute, present, out.
The Gymnasium Trophy for the Most Outstanding National Serviceman, Seaman G.W.M. Lagier, Walters Division. Seaman Lagier. Die Salverman familietrofee vir die naaste beste seeman, Seeman J. Kuiper, Weerman Divisie, Seeman Kuiper.